Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the Mr. Fix-It channel. Today I have on my bench a basket case. Now this basket case belongs to a 1998 Suzuki TL1000S. This is a V-twin, and this is how I received it. So this is not quite a basket case, it's more like a box case. So I gotta figure out how to think outside of this box and put this thing back together. Stay tuned.
I was sitting out there in the shed one evening, not doing too much of nothing, just kind of staring at the wall. And
the story I got with this bike is the owner said he was rev bombing it, which I assume he was just blah blah blah, right? And something broke, so he pulled it all apart, found out that it had a broken shim bucket. Okay, that's pretty bad. It also hung a valve open, damaged the piston. He replaced the piston, replaced the cylinder, replaced the head, tried to put the engine back in time, couldn't get it back in time correctly, started the engine and smacked the exhaust valves into the new piston. So he brought it to me hoping that I can put this bike back together, put it back in time, and start it up for him. So that's my job here today. Alright, so let's look at some of the carnage here. This is the cylinder, which, really looking at it, it's still usable. Not sure why he replaced that. Here is the piston. Now he said he attempted to weld the holes back closed in this piston and failed, so he replaced the piston. Now the cylinder head, see, let me get this straight. One of these two cylinder heads he bought to replace, and I think this one, yeah, this one is the one that took the damage initially. That's destroyed. This cylinder head is the one he used to replace that one, and when he started the bike up and smacked the valves to the piston, he broke the valve guide. So I told him it was cheaper to replace the cylinder head, since they were only a few bucks, than it would be to replace the valve guides and this head. So that brings us over to the replacement for the replacement cylinder head, which looks to me, haven't really gotten into inspecting this very closely yet, but looks okay. So I need to install the valves. Now I got bags of parts here. I'm gonna have to mix match some of these parts, which is never ideal, but this is what I got to work with. And there's random nuts and bolts. Everything's covered in filth. Everything needs to be cleaned. Time the valves and figure out where everything goes in a timely manner to go into this head. Hopefully everything wears in nice and there's no issues. I think what I got to do to get started here is I need to pull the two intake valves out of this head, make sure they're still straight and there's no damage, and then lap them into this head, install the valves into this. So that's where I'm going to start. So let's get the valves out of this head. Alright, this is my tool. There are many like it, but this one is mine. I'm going to tap on the top of the valve here to try and release the keepers from the springs before I try to take the valves out. So let me just grab my hammer. See, I want the intake valve, so these are the two I'm going for. So I'm just going to take this socket, I'm going to place it on top of the valve like this. I'm just going to strike it. That should release the keepers from the valve spring. Don't whack it too hard because you can release the valve spring and everything will go flying. Just takes a few seconds here to get the tool adjusted correctly. Alright, that looks good. Okay, so it's been, I don't know, a couple weeks, and found some bad parts. So unfortunately, when I was doing my inspection of these parts, the camshaft, well, that's junk. So we couldn't use that. And I do have a good set of intake valves. The exhaust valves that he ordered are the wrong valves. So got two exhaust valves, got two good intake valves, got two more camshafts. The problem with all these parts is that none of these parts have ran together before. Everything should be good. The Japanese make really good high quality stuff, so I'm not really concerned. So I looked these camshafts over, they're good to go. The valves are good to go. I got 4 shim buckets that have never been in this head before, and I did go through and check and make sure they all had good clearance. I got one that's a little tight, but I think it's okay. I don't know anything about this head. It came from I don't know where, so I'm just going to look it over real good. I'm going to take this over to the sink. I'm going to wash it with soap and water. I'm going to dry it off with compressed air. Then I'm going to hose it down with brake clean, and once all that's done, we'll come back and start the reassembly process. Okay, now it's all clean. I'm going to go ahead and prep this gasket surface. I usually use a razor blade like this. This is a Stanley, and if you keep the logo up, so there's a burr on this blade. One side will want to gouge the aluminum, the other side will glide nicely. And I noticed that if you keep the logo up, usually on these Stanley blades, they scrape really nice. And I'm just going to scrape this gasket. I'm going to get all this off of there. You can use whatever scraper makes you happy, as long as you're not scratching or gouging this thing up. If you got the money, there's a carbide tipped super scraper. I haven't tried one of those yet, but I assume it's pretty good. I don't know, it sounds kind of high priced to me. Seems like this works pretty good. I guess if you had a really hard, nasty gasket that was really stuck on there, it might be worth the money. Just take your time here, just get all this off of here. You don't want to have to take this cylinder head back off because you didn't scrape the gasket and it leaked. How do you make scraping a gasket interesting on YouTube? I guess you're going to talk about something interesting. I usually just edit all this out because it's so boring to watch. But this is the time-consuming process that really makes or breaks your rebuild. This has to be done. So I know I just washed this and I just put debris all back down in it, but hopefully it's degreased and everything should just blow out. So I'm just going to use some compressed air and blow all this crap back out. I think the next step here is to lap the valves in. First thing I want to do is I want to make sure that the valve guides are clean, so I'm just going to take a Q-tip and a little bit of brake clean and swab. See, look at all that dirt that's in there. Swab all these out real good. Alright, this is the valve grinding tool that I use. Had this thing for years, couldn't tell you how many. I don't want to show my age at all here. But this thing, I think I'm going to retire it. Yeah, it's split open here. The rubber's getting stiff. It don't really like to hang on, so let's do away with this. And let's use this brand new one. Hopefully this brand new one is just as good, if not better, as this older one was. We all know how things are going these days when it comes to quality and price of parts. I'm going to put just a tiny bit of oil on this stem just so it's not going in dry. I'm going to take the valve grinding compound. There's all different kinds of valve grinding compound. This is a Permatex brand. There's coarse, there's fine. This one doesn't specify, so I'm not sure. So just some valve grinding compound. You can go down the whole rabbit hole about valve grinding compounds if you want. But get you some valve grinding compound. The most important thing here, people, listen. Don't get any valve grinding compound on the stem. This is some really thin, goopy stuff. I'm just going to put it right on the edge of this. I'm going to put it right here on the edge. Don't use a lot. And being careful not to get any of the valve grinding compound on the stem. I'm going to stick the valve right in there. Take your tool, use the most suitable end. Hopefully it'll suction on there like so. This is the hardest part about doing this, is making the tool do its job. And you just kind of rub it. Not really putting any pressure down on it. I'm just picking up and setting back down. That will grinding compound back on the seat where you want it. And this is the trick with this, is the tool doesn't really like to hang on to the valve. And the valve's got to be clean. You can't do this if the valve's dirty. You can see how frustrating this is. Now I'm going to look. And you can see there's a gray line all the way around. That's where I was grinding on. I don't see any pits. I don't see any narrow spots in this. That's what I want to see. I'm not trying to reshape this valve, I'm just trying to make sure that it seals all the way around. Now I'm going to wipe this out of the valve seat. Be careful not to get it all over everything. I'm going to do the same thing. Look here, I should have a nice defined line where that was grinding together all the way around. This looks good. I'm going to go ahead and do the other 3 valves and then we'll start reassembling. Just a little tip here when you're doing this. Use 2 rags. Use 1 rag to wipe off all your grinding compound, because you don't want to be wiping your hands with the rag. It's got all the grit all over it and then touching all your parts. So maybe that's a good idea. Okay, now that that's done, I'm going to brake clean this area out really good now. I don't have any of the Moly based assembly lube that the manual requires, but I do have this Federal Mogul assembly lubricant. I've been using this stuff for years. I've not had any problems using this. Some of it's red, this flavor is green. I'm going to take some of this assembly lube and I'm going to coat the valve stem. Just going to give a little check, make sure I don't feel anything gritty. Move this back and forth. Okay, now I'm going to grab my valve spring and set that on there and get the tool ready. Just want to make sure you get that end centered on the valve spring and this end centered on the valve. Make sure these guys are clean. I'm going to take some of my lube, I'm going to put it on the valve stem if I can get in there. A little pair of tweezers really help this part. Take these and I'm just going to set them in. Not always the easiest thing to do here. Okay, what's going on is the valve keeper is slid down in too far and it's holding the valve spring over and I can't get the other keeper in, so I'm just going to let this back out. There's only one way you can get a good hold of it, and that's upside down and backwards. Any other way you can't get a hold of it. Alright, now you got that installed, take your socket again and just tap this lightly again. Make sure those are seated in there. If the valve drops, bad things happen. That's pretty much the tedious process of putting this back together, so let me get all these valves put together and we'll continue. I'm going to go ahead and do the valve adjustment while the head's right here and easy to get to on the bench. But I don't know, none of these shims have a place, so I'm just going to have to guess and just stick a shim in and stick the cams in here and measure it and see what I got. So I can already see that those are way too far off. I don't know, I'm purely guessing at this point. I'm going to put a little bit, just a little bit of oil on the cam buckets. Lightly touch the cam bearings here. Some oil. And then just measure the gap now. Tap that in. I'm not going to put any of the bolts in this yet because I'm just going to get a rough idea, because these could be way off. So what is the spec? I forgot to look that up in the book. Okay, so the manual calls for the intake to be 4 to 8 thousandths or 0.1 to 0.2 millimeters, and on the exhaust side they're looking for 8 to 12 thousandths or 0.2 to 0.3 millimeters. I'm just going to see what I got here on the intake first, and then I'll start adjusting from there. So I got the 4th thou or 0.1 mil. It don't go underneath that one, but there's plenty of room under that one. So I need to go down until I can get one under that one. Alright, before I put the head on, there's a few parts I got to swap over, like these 3 studs here. You just take 2 nuts, run them down the stud, just tighten them 2 together, and then you can run that stud in. Alright, got this little coolant pipe nipple and an O-ring. I'm going to put some silicone grease on the O-ring. Go ahead and slip this in. Easier said than done, of course. Okay, now the head's ready to go on. Alright, I got this surface cleaned up. I'm going to go ahead and install the head gasket. I'm just going to put this little piece of wire on the cam chain so it'll be easier for me to pull it back out of here. Oh, the head gasket came off. Sure, this would be easier to do with the exhaust off of it, but it is doable with it on there. Here's my cam chain. I'll let that hang down there. I'm going to coat these washers in oil because that's what the manual recommends. About this time is when you need to start being real careful that you don't drop any parts down in the motor. Alright, I'm just going to run all these down. These are 12 millimeter. This one's not cooperating. That one does not want to thread in. Alright, so the threads for the cylinder head bolts are jacked up in these two bottom holes. So that's going to have to be fixed. So I guess I'm going to have to pull this head gasket back off and pull the jug out. Oh, there's another nut up there. Now you never know what you're going to run into working on a bike like this. It's been all tore apart for months. Never know. Hopefully the connecting rod's not bent or anything crazy. And we can actually maybe get this bike put back together here. All these hoses in the way. Alright, there's that. Yeah, those threads don't look good down in there for sure. This is an M10 1.25. Let's see, let me grab my other tool. You figure out how to hold the piston up out of the way. I guess grab a bungee. Just make sure you grab the dirtiest bungee cord you got in the whole place. Bungee this guy up somehow out of the way. See if we can fix these threads. This is a ratcheting square drive. It's got 4 different sizes in it. It's great for these taps. Well, if I'd have known that this was like this 2 weeks ago when the bike was brought here, I could have had this already done while I waited 2 weeks for parts. But since you can't think of everything, you kind of just gotta go with it. I mean, how often would you think, oh, I need to thread those head bolts in to make sure that the threads aren't jacked up? Well, I'm going to finish this out and then I'll come back. If these head bolts are binding up at all when you're trying to put this together, you're not going to get the proper torque on the head and you're probably going to have problems. So it's worth your time to go through and fix all these threads. Otherwise you might be right back in here. Alright, we can go ahead and release this. You know the fun part. So I want to make sure these rings are staggered correctly. Go ahead and put some oil on the piston and the rings. Alright, so we can go ahead and slip this piston back in the bore here. Your timing chain magnet helps here. Grab that timing chain up out of there. There's one hose back here in the way, gotta get that out. Okay, there's that on. Alright, so what the book says, so this is your camshaft sprocket idler. That's this part right here. This is the front cylinder, this is the rear cylinder. There's a notch on this. Where is it? Right there. That notch corresponds with a notch on the cylinder head. That'll need to be lined up like that. And you want the FT mark in the sight hole. Now when you bring this front timing mark up into this hole, what they're telling you need to do is you need to rotate this around until the intake cam of the back cylinder head is pointing down. You can see how that lobe is pointing down, this one's pointing towards the rear. And then you set these so that the lobes are facing away from each other and all these marks line up on the cylinder head gasket surface. So that's how they're telling you. So if you can't get it to, if you ain't got the rear cylinder with the cams in this position, then you need to rotate it around one more time. Okay, I got this all coated with assembly lube. Now I'm going to try to set this in here. This looks like it's a lot of fun to do. Okay, so that mark is right here. These two teeth are painted. There's also a mark right there, and there's a mark down inside here, and a mark there. So there's marks everywhere. I'm going to have this mark pointing up, in line with that mark, in line with that mark in there. I'm going to take a little pick, and I'm just going to walk this chain on here. Okay, that looks good. Now I'm going to stick the shaft bolt in here. Alright, that looks like it's aligned. Just going to push up on the tensioner, chain slider tensioner deal here. Take all the slack out of it, if I can. Okay, with me pushing on the tensioner in there, you can see that looks like I'm lined up. At this point, double check your FT mark over on your flywheel over there. Make sure that's still aligned. And as long as that's still aligned, you should be good to go. I'm going to go ahead and take this wire off here now. I can tighten this down. Alright, this is a 10mm Allen head. It gets torqued to 29 foot-pounds or 40 Newton meters. Don't forget about these two nuts underneath here that go into this head studs. Alright, now this timing chain tensioner, how you set this thing is on the end of this bolt here. There's a little reverse thread, so you're going to thread this into here, not all the way down. And then you're going to take this little lever here and you're going to push in on it. You're going to collapse that. Now you're going to unthread this, and when you're unthreading this, it'll thread into this part and it'll hold it down for you. Now you can install this into the jug. Let's see, I think I need the number 4 Allen. It's a 5mm Allen. Now to set the cam chain tensioner, just thread this nut or this bolt back in and you'll hear it click. So that's set. And you're just going to tighten this down. This goes to 16 foot-pounds. These two little ones go to 7 foot-pounds. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and set the camshafts in there. And I'm going to use some more of this assembly lube. I'm going to slather this all over this camshaft. I've got to line up the marks. We can set this guy in there. And the same thing for the intake cam. Make sure your marks are lined up. So when these marks are lined up here, let's see if I can get a shot of this. So we got this mark here where it's painted, that mark's lined up. These marks are lined up. These marks are lined up on the front head. I'm going to go around to the other side. These marks are lined up. These are kind of hard to see, but they're lined up. And then there's that painted teeth. And the painted teeth here are lined up. So this thing should be in time. Taking on a job like this is very time consuming. I'm just going to say it. Alright, now this line here, this is a secondary air system. This is an emissions component. Now this cylinder head came off of the R model, which doesn't utilize this system. So this is just going to get capped off and not used. Alright, next thing I want to do is I got to find the exhaust flange bolts and get this exhaust hooked up. So let's work on that next. A little bit of anti-seize on these. Okay, I need to find the appropriate Allen wrench. Alright, we got two of these engine mount bolts here. I'm going to install this valve cover. Before I do, I want to add some ultra black RTV right here. Just a little bit. Don't go freaking crazy with this stuff. It looks like somebody had some fun getting that out of there. Oh my God. I'm not going to tighten this real tight because this is probably going to get replaced. So I'm just going to snug it just a little bit. This guy has a bunch more work reassembling the rest of this, you know, the fairing and all this other stuff. My job is to just get it started. So I'm just putting enough together to get it running. Putting these intake boot bolts in without taking all the throttle bodies and everything off, that was a pain. Oh my God. Okay, I'm getting real close to starting this bike up. Now there is no coolant in this, so I'm not going to run it long. I think the last thing I got to do is I got to put the gas tank on. There's a few components like the map sensor. It's missing its vacuum line. I don't have one to put back on it, but it should run without that. I don't know. I guess let's see, the battery's junk, so I got to get some way to jump start this. Let's figure that out real quick. I'll get the gas tank back on and we'll figure out, you know, jumper cables and another battery or something. See if this thing will crank, and let's hear it. Let's hear it bark off. Okay, let's crank this thing over. Let's see if it starts or if it bursts into flames. Let's try the choke. Okay, we got a bunch of oil peeking out of somewhere. Well, that was tragic. Spewing oil from the cylinder base gasket. That means I gotta take all this back off and do all this over again. I am not happy. So I'm sitting here looking at this gasket. I'm not sure why it was leaking. So it was leaking pressurized oil. It wasn't just a drip. I mean, you saw it only ran for a few seconds, and I saw it welling up in here, and it was spilling over and going over that side of the motor. There's nothing high pressure here. This is just a bolt hole. You got this this is the oil. It looks like the oil for the head here. Why would it be pressurized? What the heck? I just don't know. I'll have to think about this one. I think I'm just gonna order a new base gasket and a new head gasket and just wait for that to get here and then reassemble this thing. It could be because the previous owner, I haven't asked him yet if he reused that gasket, and then I had to jug off too and put it back on. Usually you can reuse those metal gaskets, especially the base gasket, but I think because of this design and it's got the oil pressure right at that base gasket, that's not a good idea. I'm gonna get 2 new gaskets on the way. We'll put this thing back together and then we'll see if it runs and doesn't spew oil everywhere. Stay tuned. Well, that's all the time I got this week. Get them parts ordered, and next week we'll see if we can get this bike to do something. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and don't be afraid to fix it. Thanks for watching.